Before I get into the next point, let's talk Inkopolis Plaza, which was one of the inspirations that inspired me to make, the maps in general. So, Inkopolis Plaza, that is the Gmod port currently. Holy crap, it's bad. And, I get it, it's all we have at the moment. And, I agree that for the effort at the time that we all knew that was potentially possible, it was great. But in hindsight, it is so bad. The lighting of the stage, and granted, even if there's going to be a fixed version of the stage, by default, the way these are ported, the lighting is not going to be great, but the lighting was bad to the point where it's, everything is, lit with generic source lighting, which looks like crap. There is no HDR in the map, even though that is possible. It just doesn't look that great. But this map doesn't even have HDR at all. The old one. So, that's, The scale of the map is wrong in comparison to the Inklings, who are the main users of the map at all. The map is actually scaled for Team Fortress 2 characters. I assume, the map was made for a TF2 game mode, but the fact of the matter is, that when he was making it for Gmod, he lazily just ported it over from whatever he was doing for TF2, and then didn't bother to think, oh yeah, people are gonna pose the Inklings in this, I should probably make the Inklings fit to their proper size. It's not like the Inklings are, really tiny either, so that you could make, let's assume someone has, a story or whatever where I don't, but let's assume someone has a story where, the Inklings are tiny, I assume, some random story, what if there was a tiny Inkling in Inkopolis one day? It's not even, they aren't even that small. It's the Inklings are this awkward dwarf size, and everything is massive around them. It's wrong, and it's really awkward seeing Inklings being used in pictures in that, because I get it, it's all we have, but goodness, it sucks. Even when the Inklings are just posed on the crossroads, because you can go in the game yourself, the area is not that large. It's bothersome. But even beyond that, okay, the scale's awkward, the lighting's crap. What else could possibly be wrong? The collision is really wonky. There's a giant wall encapsulating half of the stage around the boundaries, where behind where you spawn in the game, it's where the train is. There's a wall leading up to the sky there. There's also a similar high-reaching wall behind where Spike is. And not only that, there's awkward collision behind the lobby area, and I get it, you're not supposed to access that area, but you could just leave that area, non-existent. And even beyond that, the background areas of the tower, that is, there's a couple of, compartments or something. There's a couple of, buildings in the tower, Inkopolis Tower, Plaza Tower, that, kind of look like they can be enterable. Well, you can't enter them because the collision just encapsulates the whole thing in a cylinder where you can't access it. Whoops. I mean, I know you're not supposed to access the area, but guys, if we're gonna be able to freely roam in this 3D world, we should be able to have more access than what the game provides. So, I get it, it's so then people can stand on the top, but you could have two cylinders then. One on the top, one on the bottom, and then people could literally stand on either one as your collision, and then that would still work. Beyond that, however, yes, there's still more. More than half of the props in the plaza, that is, assets that are used in the plaza, that aren't loaded with the Plaza map are missing. Yes, the amiibo box is there. Yes, the chairs for Callie and Marie are there. The awning in front of that cafe shop, the signs in front of Annie and Sheldon's shops, the Miiverse box. I know Judd's box is there, and so is the manhole, but not even the arcade is there. What even makes this worse is the Plaza internally in Splatoon's files is referred to as Plaza 00. So is the square. The square functionally, Inkopolis Square, functions as the Plaza for Splatoon 2, so it is also referred to as the Plaza, and all of the assets related to it are also called Plaza, which all of the props I mentioned, all of the props that I just mentioned, that are separate from the Plaza's original file, they are all labeled, and because he found the amiibo box, which is also labeled with Plaza, this makes this even more egregious. All of these props are labeled with the word Plaza in them. I want you to sit on that train of thought for a moment. He found Plaza amiibo box in the files, but couldn't find, say, Plaza game, which is the internal name for the arcade box. And what makes this even worse is some of the files are contained in what Nintendo calls pack files, so then they can compress half of the files so then Splatoon isn't so big and whatever. The props for the Plaza are in a different spot than the Plaza itself. The amiibo box and the arcade, for example, and the rest of it, is in the same spot. So where you would find the Plaza props for the original, for the amiibo box, you would also find them in the same file for the rest of the Plaza files that he just conveniently forgot. And he knows they exist because, he obviously got the amiibo box and Judd's box, which are both assets from the thing, and he also got the TV files because the last problem with it, the animated texture on the board of all the it's a recreation from the game of the animation that plays in the game. That is also found in the same location the rest of the props I just mentioned are in, and he edited that. He edited it to include a weapon that doesn't exist in Splatoon, and he only joked about it on his Twitter and whatever. I think it's a plate of food after that. And then after that is a picture of Callie looking quite, I'll just say stimulated. The image is from a porn site, supposedly. Might I remind you, the game is Gary's Mod is $10 or whatever on Steam. That's kids change, pocket change. He knew full well kids were going to download it and see that. So yeah, any objections to it being replaced? So yeah, not only is it technically that it's also got biased propaganda in the midst of the screen. It's sorry dude, don't do that, please. It's not a very good port at all. There are lots of complaints about it, and I agree with all of them pretty much. And hopefully, eventually, I may be able to work on a better version of it. Never mind the fact that Squidbot's ports of other things. The Squid Sisters are the wrong size, for one. And the Octoling texture they used was not one from the game, but an edited custom version of it that was that made the Octoling's hair more clean and smooth. And mind you, texture edits are fine, but when you're trying to masquerade it as a port, sorry, you kind of end up on the wrong end of the stick there. So yeah. And then, Walleye Warehouse is a recreation too, so that it just go back to my Flounder Heights criticism for why that isn't the best either. So, and those were the only 3 maps before that point, before Skate Park and Octostomp in my tests. So anyway, so again, we worked on Skate Park, promoted it, and then never released it properly because we couldn't finish it, and he never had the motivation to finish it. We began to have issues with each other before he met Ellie around September. The first time I tried to tell him everything to do with the Octoling thing, which that was how I found the original dump of the game, because so then I could prove the Octolings through development got another mouth model in their Bfres file, which originally there were only 4 that they use in single player probably, but there's no need to add another one if they're already using 4 that are perfectly fine and you're not going to see the other one anyway, especially since everyone's probably already cleared the campaign at this point, so you can't really add something into that. That's kind of why Urchin Underpass, the old version of it, is still in the files, because if you turn the old Mission 21, which uses Urchin Underpass, if you turned that into the new Urchin Underpass, the whole stage would break. It is not designed and balanced around new Urchin Underpass. So, similarly, you can't add an Octoling mouth to that because, well, if it already works before that, why add another one? It's released as it is, why edit it? I mean, the only reason the Killer Whale, for example, is edited, even in DJ Octavia's fight, the Killer Whale uses a new texture that it got compared to the launch version. The only reason that is because apparently the Killer Whale texture that Octavia uses is the same one that's used in multiplayer, probably to reduce redundancy because, hey, it's the Killer Whale, that makes sense, right? Why duplicate it if if it's still the Killer Whale? So that's the only thing, and I don't think they actively intended to change the single player one, they just intended to change it for multiplayer, so it was just a side effect that it changed the single player one. They weren't even touching it because the game is already released with it, so they changed everything about it, all of what they could before the game released, so no need to change it after that, especially if it's a single player campaign. So he wouldn't believe me about what was going on with the Octolings, even though I've been there and I can provide multiple images and proof that I've gathered over the years that, I was taking part in the whole thing. That I've been there, I've seen the whole thing, and I know for a fact they were probably going to be playable at one point. Before the fact that Nogami mentioned it in the interview, so it's pretty much confirmed at this point. And then, we had a fallout over that. That was the first time we ended up going at each other, but this second time after he finished Skate Park was... Ooh. I've only told this to a few people because, holy crap, this is... He was beginning to lose motivation on the whole thing, on doing it himself, and I was beginning to think, gee, I wonder why. And, I kept, during this as well, I kept telling him, show me how to do how to do what you're doing. I can happily help out if you can show me what it is exactly that you're doing. And he didn't for the longest time. But this wasn't about that. He was losing motivation. So in order for him to keep up the pace, he wanted to accept donations from everybody in the community. Yep, you were hearing it straight from my mouth. That is exactly what he wanted. and he was on this, setting up a Patreon and everything, and pulling it under the illusion that we were gonna, because initially I was fine with that, but after a while, I wasn't. I don't own these models. We don't own these things. Sure, like, we own them as much as we own the consoles and such. We don't own them to profit off of them. I don't own these models. I don't own what I have from Nintendo. I don't own these things. They are not mine. Like, originally, for a while, I had, because I have a whole bunch of characters on DeviantArt, I had set the title of all of the characters to Splatoon OCs, but that's an oxymoron. They're not original characters, because they're fan characters off of something else. They're derivative. So, I then ended up changing all of them to FCs, because that makes way more sense. And similarly, we cannot give the impression that we're profiting off of these things. Not only that, I don't want to do it. So I then ended up making a worst case scenario for myself, a private document of my worst fears that Nintendo could possibly do to me. Not just Nintendo, but like my whole family and that, in regards to what would happen if this future were to carry out. And I then thought to myself, if I don't want this future to happen, I need to tell them to stop this now. And so I did. And that's when he got mad, because then he started trying, oh, what if we made the maps and then tried to tell everyone else that we're making them for an original game mode with original code, and that will get around the law. Never mind the fact that I don't actually want to make them for those game modes yet, nor did I want that to be our main focus, nor did I want to lie to everyone about what we were really doing. So, no. And soon enough he stopped it, but, whoa. That was like early January 2018, December. And then that was the first time I said, oh, we quit the map project and we're not working on it anymore. And that's when I released Skatepark and Octostomp to DeviantArt, because why keep them in my computer if no one's going to see it then, right? So then I began to ask him, like, more and more, and obviously this meant he wasn't going to work on it anymore himself. So then I kept asking him, how can I do this then? How can I do what you did with Skatepark and Octostomp, which he had never shown me for all of that period of time? So the first thing was scale. So he then told me, you should probably get the scale based off of reference images in the game itself. And by this point, Splatnet was shut down, so I had to turn on the game around midnight and hope the map was there. Then I would take some reference images and compare them repeatedly with the models in Blender, because Fission had given me the enhanced models for gear ports, which later failed. So I still want to do the gear at some point, but I'm focused on the maps at the moment, so I can't attempt to work on the clothes. But I had the Inkling models as scale for in Blender for the sake of comparing them to what they're going to be like in Source, their size, and what the map is going to look like when they're in it. So that was great. That took like a week or something because of all the maps that I was trying to get. The base value he had for Skatepark was Skatepark was 3.4 its original size. So, and not obviously not all of the other maps fit that 3.4 size. So I had to gather all the references myself afterwards, and I was fine with that. Perfectly fine with that. And then he taught me basic collision, which I was very, 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 very confused about until he showed me, what was it? He showed me a method where you select a face in edit mode, bring the cursor to it, and then make a model -1 in the direction that the face is in. So if it's on the G, if it's a model facing, if it's a face on the Z axis, you would like press Z -1, or if it's on the X axis, it's X -1 or X1, or it was like G -1. So then the floor is at the same level with the actual model, which I was concerned about. So he showed me that for a while. He showed me that on Walleye Warehouse, which was really bad, and that was fine. I then ended up doing the basic collision for that, and then I learned how to extrude, which then helped that. But for a while after that, then I had no idea how to do curved surfaces or slopes. Ramps, slopes, ugh. No, I did not know how to do that. So then at that point, at that point, it was like March something, so the egg hunt was happening on Roblox, and I couldn't try to contact him while I was busy with my friend. And I did make him aware that I was going to be away for a while, and everyone else as well, but I don't know, it just seemed like there was a level of apathy, because at this point, he'd gotten more interested in a game called Guild Wars 2, which I wasn't interested in, because when it comes to traditional fantasy, I'm not really super interested in that. Traditional fantasy is not really my thing, which also, I'm not interested in Zelda, because some aspects of it kind of lead into that, so I did like playing A Link Between Worlds, but that didn't entice me to play literally everything else. I think when we were playing Hyrule the first time, he begged and begged and begged and begged and begged me to play Ocarina of Time, even though I've seen it and know that I'm not really interested in a game like that. I know it's grandiose, I know it was amazing for the time, I just don't see it as the holy grail of video games, okay? it just isn't that to me. It can be that to you and whatever, but I just don't see it that way. Okay? It made an impact. It is what it is. It's an old game, and I just don't feel like playing it. I can be that one person, and I'm allowed to do that. The world doesn't kill me yet for not doing that, so I'm not any worse for, not. Anyway, but like, I wasn't interested in it because I'm not interested in traditional fantasy like that. It's, how do I describe? It's like trying to be real, but at the same time, it's trying to be overly grandiose with how it sort of is fantasy and all that, and it's all like realistically textured and such, assuming this is like some sort of real world that could potentially exist. So I wasn't, and like, the idea of it just didn't entice me. It sounded really hard for him, so I just didn't want to play it. I didn't want to get interested in it, and he was fine with that, even though he just consistently played it for ages and ages and ages, to the point where he said, to the side of his breath, like, I'm gonna make something for your birthday, like, what was it, a week before my actual birthday was, in April. And then he said, and then on the day he didn't even say so much as a happy birthday, and then the call afterwards was him trying to justify, I care about you, right? Like, even though he's playing Guild Wars in front of me, I care about you, right? We've stuck around for an entire year, and I still care, all that stuff. And that was our next fallout, because he was being selfish and only cared about himself, because he would only specifically care about that and not trying to help me with what his promise was in the first place, what he came to me for in the first place. And so I got rather annoyed at that, and this was to the point where I had to get someone else to help step in to tell him that help is important in order for other people to be able to proceed. And like to rewind a bit, he had worked on more than just Skate Park and Octostomp. He was also working on Salisbury Rig. One thing he did in Salisbury Rig, it was like mid-June 2017, because I have the chat log saved, and I mentioned something about the video in the chat, but he only showed the video in the call of it. He streamed to me a video of an animation he had done in Salisbury Rig, which got me intrigued as to how he made it. He didn't port it, but he made it with the intention to port it. And it was made manually by himself because the crane was synced to the platforms, which it isn't in the game. But he knew that and was showing it to me out of a potential hype moment. You know, we could do this kind of thing. So he'd done that. And so, you know, I was eventually going, if we could do the collision stuff, maybe we could do Salisbury Rig and he can show me how he did the animation so I can do the animation and then we can make good maps for people. But he was being selfish. Really selfish, and so was I. So I learned basic collision, and then I learned how to extrude, and then I made the maps as basic collision. And making the initial collision, you know, just making the shapes, because that's what I was told to do. Making the initial shapes took about 3 or something months, because 1 month was spent on the first plaza, and then the second month was spent on the square. And then it was like, after that, I think it was a week for Octo Valley, then several other, I think it was another week for the Octo bosses after Octostomp. And then after that, it took yet another week for all of the multiplayer stages that I was planning to do. Now, at this point, mind you, he was still promising that he would be able to do things. It was March of that year when he asked me, do you have the Salmon Run map? And at that point I only had Spawning Grounds to work on and had gathered the assets for it, so I was very surprised at this point, since he quote unquote lost motivation to even work on it. And like, so I was surprised, and then, you know, I sent him all the stuff for it. And then after this fallout in April, the reason I want to make the map so much, that I told him as well, is because I made a whole bunch of stories once, and I can't really tell them without these maps. Now, even the ones that don't even have any relevance to my stories that I haven't even made, I've still made stuff for them, because I feel bad if I only just did the things that were relevant to myself. Which he did ask, do you want to do the maps relevant to your story so then you can port them first? No. And instead, then I just did the rest of the stuff with the collisions. He then showed me the slopes afterwards, and that's when I got to work on all of that. At this point, however, we began to shift our priorities of work, so then, because he was beginning to end school that year, last year, that, you know, the project would be handled differently. So, at this point, I was doing majority of the maps, and I was fine with that. I'm still fine with that. In fact, since I'm still working on them alone, I kind of had to. So he kept promising the Salmon Run map, which was Spawning Grounds, Salisbury Rig, because he'd then lost the file for it, because he'd moved computers like 3 times or something, and kept losing the files. I now, since I've looked at the chat log, I realise he'd given me a screenshot back when he was working on the first version of Salisbury Rig, which had his file directory in the window he was working on in Blender. So I could have told him where it was, but never mind that. He wanted to do Salisbury Rig, because no. He did both of them because they were the first 2 test fire maps. He specifically wanted to do Walleye Warehouse as well, because Walleye Warehouse was, was that? No, okay. He said Salisbury Rig was the first place he played in. he wanted to do Walleye Warehouse because he showed me the tutorial, collision tutorial in it, and then felt obligated to complete it. He didn't do that though. He was doing Salt Spree Rig because it was the first map he played. Walleye Warehouse was the first stage I played. I'm messing that up. So, I then later got a hold of the Splatoon 2 updates. Within them, all of the other Salmon Run maps that I ended up gathering the assets for, which I wanted to do them for various reasons that I couldn't really, I couldn't really do them before, and if I had them and Spawning Grounds at the same time, I wouldn't even have worked on Spawning Grounds, because Maruna's Bay was the first Salmon Run map I played, and I have fond memories of it. Lost Outpost of the original 4, is my favourite map, visually speaking, and, it's also a part of my story, so I kind of feel obligated to do it. And Salmonid Smokeyard had a place in my story that was really important, that I really wanted to do, so I wanted to do that, and still want to at some point. Someone else has taken Spawning Grounds and Lost Outpost, so I'm just hoping that I can give feedback to them now, but, no one's taken those yet, so I'm hoping I could potentially do them, But at the time, while I was doing the collisions, because the question I asked him was about the collisions at this point, I sent him a question mid last year, something to do with the collisions for Maruna's Bay at the time. Because the tide changes, I had no idea how that could be handled. I didn't know if we could separate it by map, or if it was just as easy as an animation yet, which I don't think it is, considering water can't move in Source, so whatever. So the question I asked him at the time, and this is what makes it even more confusing, that he was supposedly losing motivation because he kept promising this stuff. I don't know how I phrased the question to which, but I know the intention was so I could verify what I was doing, not necessarily asking him to do this part for me. So, Maruna's Bay, I think I said something like, should I collision the lowest tide and then copy it across the other files with the higher tides, because that was just for reference, and should I do that, was the question I was trying to pose to him. And I think it was the very next message he sent after that was he wanted to do all of the Salmon Run maps because he wanted to make a game mode of Salmon Run, because he'd seen a video that I'd posted on Twitter of the game mode and saw that it was fun and wanted to try and recreate it in Source, which obviously he's never going to do now, so that was completely pointless. So, seeing no reason, if he wants to do this, I see no reason to take that from him. I'm like, I specifically tell him first, I wasn't asking you to take them from me, but if you're fine with it, okay then. And so then I told him my things to do with Maruna's Bay. Maruna's Bay and Salmonid Smokeyard specifically, and funnily enough, Lost Outpost and Spawning Grounds don't have this. Beyond just, animations because the propeller platforms exist. Maruna's Bay and Salmonid Smokeyard have areas that in-game are normally covered by the green water, but they are actually fully rendered. The river in the middle of Salmonid Smokeyard where the platforms go across, the underneath of that is fully rendered, even if it never dips that low. Even on the lowest tide, there's still a tiny puddle of water still there. The whole thing is still fully rendered though. Same with there is, on the lowest tide in Maruna's Bay, there's one appendage, I'm going to call it. There's one appendage of land that loops around in a circle, and then there's a third appendage equivalent, Spawning Grounds has 3. like, there's one that's kind of like a loop. It's like an island surrounded, like, there's a little puddle of water there. It's not really a puddle, but it's a puddle because there's geometry on the other side of it. Underneath that puddle is fully rendered too. Fully, even if it never ever dips that low. And I want that to be able to be explorable. So I then had to clarify this to him. I needed to get another bunch of screenshots and videos to be able to prove this, because that's what my intention was and still is with those. Because wouldn't that be fun? Imagine, from a perspective of someone who's only downloading these maps, mind you, Marina's Bay is released. Great. Now here's the even better news. You can explore a part of the game you can't normally explore in the game. That's, still explorable within tangible boundaries. Wouldn't that be fun, right? Like, it should just be a given. Like, you go in, you make an Inkopolis Plaza port, you should be able to go inside the Squid Sister studio, because everyone wants to pose in the Squid Sister studio, right? Everyone wants to make recreations of the Squid Sisters making news, or having an off day in the news studio or whatever. Everyone wants to pose their squid next to the Squid Sisters. Okay, now an uncharted bunch of land in Marina's Bay. I haven't actually done this, but let's assume someone has. Uncharted treasure underneath that puddle that nobody can visit in a salmon run work session, a work shift. Imagine the possibilities. So, yeah, and like, same with the Salmon in Smokyard River. It river puddle, it's just, it makes sense, okay? So, he was fine with doing those maps, and then, because of I told him the most detailed story I'd made at that point, which was actually inspired by the porting, because I loaded a map up of Camp Triggerfish, and because I was inspired by the fact that we were going to port these maps, I made a story around Camp Triggerfish, and I told him that story, and then at that point he felt obligated to take Camp Triggerfish and work on it as well. So, mind you, he's now working on 7 maps at this point. I still have more because I'm working on all the rest of it. So, I'm fine with this at this point. I work on the collisions and all that, and it's perfectly fine for a while. And then I finish the collisions. And at this point, okay, I want to work on Flounder Heights, because Flounder Heights, I want to make cool things with it, because it's visually really good. The collision is broken, and actually he didn't tell me how to make it properly, because nowadays the method he showed me on stream while he was fixing it up for the next couple days after that is the method I now use and have since refined, because Flounder Heights currently, what he did was, Blender has a function called convex hull, and you can check if a bunch of faces and whatnot are actually a convex hull, and that's how the collision works. He never told me that directly and had a difficult time explaining it, but it's that method which is what I use now, and I've since refined it, because Flounder Heights is ridiculously hard to edit, because there's faces that are touching each other that are in the same spot that if I edited them, the compiler would scream at me about the model being wrong, because it's a there's a hole, there's 2-dimensional geometry, therefore at some point there is a hole in one of the models, because there's a math definition for it, but the word they used during the definition is a shape that bulges. So every shape, like a cube is a convex hull, a triangular prism is a convex hull, a pentagonal prism is a convex hull. There's a visual diagram site that you can use to drag points and whatever, and that shows you what a convex shape is. So I used that for a while before I then refined the process. So then if faces touch each other or are close to touching each other, they're not in the same collision model. anymore. And a lot of my new maps are using that a lot of my new maps that I've yet to make are using that method because it's way more convenient to do that in that way, and I probably should tell him that. Doesn't matter though because he doesn't care anymore. But anyway, the collision was broken, so we had to fix it, and then he showed me how collision works. But he wasn't doing it with the intention to. He was just showing me how he was fixing it up, which was actually how he made it at all. So, great. Then he showed me Hammer and how to put the entities in. So at that point, I then compiled all the assets for all the maps, fixed up all the textures, and then made sure all of them have generic map files ready to be ported.